kick us off this week. It's his first time presenting at a conference, giving his own presentation. So let's all warm him up, make sure he has a lovely time on stage. You're good to go? Excited? Yeah. As I was saying to Salvatore earlier, you always remember your first time. So today will be no exception. Over to you, Salvatore. Have a lovely talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. There should be slides. Thank you very much. So my name is Salvatore. I work at Ledger, where I try to do some innovation on the Bitcoin hardware wallets. And by the way, since yesterday, the Miniscript-enabled application is live on mainnet, so you can try Miniscript stuff. Any Liana fans in the audience? Liana fans? Liana? So yeah, there are people working on some cool stuff with Miniscript, and it's great that now we can play with these toys. But today I'm going to speak about some research that I'm doing on the side, and it's about covenants and smart contracts. Let me try this first. Okay, cool. And coming from a background in academia, I start with the boring definitions first. And so I start by defining two terms, which is covenants and introspection, that are often used as a folklore terms, but without really defining them. And so what is a covenant? When I say covenant, what I mean is simply some UTXO that restricts what are the possible inputs, which is something that today is not possible in Bitcoin, because you can put some spending conditions on some coins. You decide how these coins are locked. It can be single signature, multi-signature, but once you satisfy those conditions, you can send it wherever you want. And the other definition is that of introspection, which means the ability to access in a script some parts of the transaction. Could be the inputs, could be the outputs, or even could be the state of the state or history of the blockchain. And often these terms are used kind of interchangeably, because if you have introspection on parts of the transaction that are relevant to the outputs, that implies a covenant, basically. But they are not exactly. There are other forms of introspection that will not create covenants. And covenants can be used to extend the smart contracting capabilities of Bitcoin, and there are many potential proposals. And the one that we'll talk about is this one, check output covenant verify, but more commonly known as MAT, which is short for Merkleize all the things. And continuing with definitions, what is a smart contract? Another term that often we don't really properly define. And basically, those are the things that we expect to be able to do with a smart contract. We want to lock some money inside. We want to be able to agree on some state of the contract. And we want to be able to define how the state of the contract changes and how you can put money in or take money out of the contract, right? And in Bitcoin, we have this thing called UTXO. So if you want to, which is an unspent transaction output, and so if you want to do a smart contract in Bitcoin, probably you have to fit it somehow in this model. And this UTXO is ambitious and identifies itself as a smart contract. And well, we have transactions. Transactions take some UTXOs, they destroy them, and they create new UTXOs. So we can consider that, well, that's a transition, right, in the smart contract. But as we said before, currently there is no way of shaping how the final UTXO will be after the transaction happens. And so hopefully that explains why covenants are so closely related to smart contracts, because if you can force the final UTXO to have some special characteristics, then this looks a lot more like what we are defining above as a smart contract. And so when we talk about how expressive is a blockchain, like we can talk about like what kind of smart contracts are possible in a blockchain, right? And so Bitcoin, we have some smart contracts, like Lightning channels are a smart contract. So we can do time locks, we can do hash locks, and we can compose these things. You can even go below this level of smart contract. You can remove script altogether. You only have chains of signatures, and you can kiss bye-bye to the Lightning network. And on the other extreme, you have the blockchains that market themselves as Turing complete, even if I think that's a bit of a misnomer. But and there is not really much beyond that, because once you can express any kind of smart contract, you can talk about how efficient it is, but you can do any smart contract, right? And what I will try to convince you today is that if we add the right kind of covenants to Bitcoin, we get extremely close to the same level of expressiveness. And I am actually not sure that that difference even exists. And one claim that I will do is that the only expressivity that matters is for the smart contracts on layer 2. Because we already know that the only way to scale smart contracts on layer 1 is a token and VC funding, and we don't want to do that. And so we expect smart contracts to be done on layer 2 mostly, and only do very simple things on layer 1. But do Bitcoiners want smart contracts, right? People, when they say smart contracts, often sometimes think about like Ponzi schemes and JPEGs and monkey JPEGs, right? But there are smart contracts we are already using. We already have like, the Lightning Network, and we know that by adding some more expressive power, we can do better with the Lightning Network. We could do other layer 2 solutions, like discrete floor contracts could improve, or there are state channels and other solutions. There are simple contracts like vaults that we'll talk about more later. There are privacy techniques that are currently not possible in Bitcoin, like confidential transactions or things like Tornado Cash, like going into more fancy cryptographic techniques, or even roll-ups could help Bitcoin scale or have more applications, but they require some complicated cryptography for that to happen. And one thing is, if we have more applications that can use the Bitcoin blockchain as a settlement layer, then to do that, they will have to pay more fees, which generally we agree that that's good for Bitcoin. And what are the risks? Well, the risk is not that much technical per se, but the only thing that anybody researching how to extend the contracting capabilities of Bitcoin is worried about is, are we going to break the incentives? In particular, we are talking about the incentives for miners. That's really the only thing that we are scared about when we talk about smart contracts in Bitcoin. And there is some great research on that, and we definitely need more people to think about this. And I don't have the answer in this talk, but that's something that we should all be aware and think about. And to conclude the introduction, I want to talk about one technique that is basically the core of any of the constructions that I'm talking about, and that's Merkle trees. So what's a Merkle tree? A Merkle tree is a very convenient way to make a summary for a big collection of objects. So if you have many objects, that could be arbitrary things like strings or movies or whatever, you can put each of them in leaf of this binary tree. And then what each internal node does is just take the two children, concatenate them, and hash them. So if you do this repeatedly, you end up with just one root. And this root is a 32-byte hash that summarizes the entire collection of objects. And the cool thing of Merkle trees is that if you want to prove that some element is inside this collection of objects, let's say the sixth element, then you can look at the path from that element to the root. And the only other hashes that you need to give to someone to be able to be convinced that that element was in the collection is all the blue nodes in this path, which is all the brothers of the nodes in the path, let's say. And another thing that it's maybe less commonly considered is that this not only works for static collection of objects, but if you want to, for example, change the sixth element in this collection, you can also do that with a Merkle proof, because the only hashes that change in the tree are the ones in the path. So the parent of 6 and the parent of the parent until the root, right? So the same Merkle proof can also be used to show that how a collection is updated if you change one element. And Merkle trees are very cool. They have a lot of applications both in Bitcoin and outside. I like to joke that if you have a scaling issue, it's because you didn't try to use Merkle trees. And well, today I'm going to try to convince you that Merkle trees are really the only thing that we need if you want to scale smart contracts in Bitcoin. And so let's go back to our ambitious UTXO that wants to become a smart contract, right? And so if you want to do a smart contract with UTXOs, well, we are talking about state, so we need to be able to put some state somehow into the UTXO. And the problem is that the state can be big. In a smart contract, you could have multiple things that are part of the state of the contract, right? And so that doesn't fit the UTXO because UTXOs have to be extremely lightweight and small. But you can probably see where this is going. Well, if you take all the state of the contract, you can imagine it as an array, as a vector of things. You can build a Merkle tree of all these things that are in the contract. And so you can instead put just the root inside the UTXO. If we find a way of just putting the root inside the UTXO, and as long as we can prove that the manipulations are correct, that seems to be going in the right direction. And in contract, we also have the program, which is how the state transitions are done. And well, one thing that Taproot did, if you look at the pay to Taproot UTXO, it looks like something very simple, which is just something that contains a public key. But if you zoom in, the public key is a little bit more complicated, because how is the public key in pay to Taproot obtained? You take some key which is known to the owner of this UTXO, which is the internal key, and there is some magic operation that is possible with Schnorr signature, where you can take some data and hide it inside this public key. And so this, in cryptographic term, it's basically a cryptographic commitment to some data inside this key. And so what is the data that in pay to Taproot is committed? It's the root of the Merkle tree containing all the scripts. And so this is something very cool, because now it allows to scale how many different spending conditions we have, and we can all put them in different leaves of this Merkle tree. And so if we put these two ideas together, well, we want this UTXO to be able to contain some data, and we have this magic operation called tweaking that hides some data inside a public key. Well, what if we do that twice, right? And so you can take a key, you can hide the data inside this key using this magic operation called tweaking, and then you can take this as the internal public key of a pay to Taproot, and you tweak it with the script. And so now in this way, you have a UTXO that commits to both data and state. It's not the only way of doing this, but it's I find this as a quite elegant way of doing this concept. And so if we put these things together, well, we kind of get the intuition that we can enforce kind of any smart contract inside Bitcoin UTXOs if we can do these two things. We want the UTXO to be able to decide what is the program of the outputs, and we want to be able to embed and hide some state that inside inputs or outputs. So we want to be able to access the state which is in the inputs, and we want to be able to commit and force the state of some output to be something that we can dynamically compute. So unlike the script, the program that we are happy to decide at the beginning, the state and the data could depend on the actual execution, so it has to be dynamically computed. And so putting all these things together, like how would the opcodes, like it's not a precise proposal, but how will the opcodes look like? Well, we need something which is an opcode that allows to verify that some input or some output is computed in that way that we described before with the magic operation called tweaking that it applied twice. And this is basically the main thing that we need for the Covenant opcode. And one thing that probably we will need is something to be able to verify Merkle proofs. So we need to be able to do this concatenate and hash operation that we need for Merkle proofs. So we already have SHA-256, and we could add something like opcat or even more restricted forms. And so at the core, this is the two things that you need. To do more interesting and more complicated smart contracts, probably it will be convenient to have some other things. This is more of a technicality. And we will need to be able to have some more input and output introspection. For example, we want to be able to know the amounts of inputs and outputs and put some restrictions on that and things like this. And one thing that I find interesting is that, well, all the opcodes that we need for this kind of things are extremely simple. Like each of them will be just a few lines of C++ code in the script interpreter. So they are very simple and atomic blocks. And so another thing that I will just mention quickly is that for some contracts, we could have some computations that are just too complicated for script or extremely expensive, and so we cannot do that in a smart contract on chain. Let's say that we have some operation that it takes 1 hour to compute, and we want the smart contract to have a transition that depends on the result of that computation. And I won't try to go into the details about this, but there is an interesting fact that you can actually make smart contracts that depend on the result of this computation without putting that on chain in the contract. So this uses an idea called fraud proofs, which is pretty well known. But the interesting thing is that it uses a fraud-proof protocol that can be implemented using these covenants. And the details you can find online. And so I find this interesting more as a theorem at this time because it kind of means that putting all these things together, there is no layer 2 construction that is not possible if you have this kind of covenant. And so one potential application of these more advanced use cases could be that if we want to do layer 2 constructions that depend on some complicated stuff that script doesn't have, like zero-knowledge proofs, well, we could, it's very unlikely that we would merge into Bitcoin Core a soft fork implementing this fancy new cryptography, but we could actually do fraud proofs on this kind of computation so that layer 1 doesn't have to know about this computation, but still you're able to do smart contracts that use this computation. And so that's interesting to me, but on this presentation I decided to focus on more simple use cases. But still, I have this slide for the meme, which is like why this is math, because we Merkleize the data, and by embedding it into UTXOs, we Merkleize the code, and then we Merkleize the execution with Merkle proofs, and we can do arbitrary smart contracts. And that's how this proposal was called math. And so for the rest of this presentation, I want to talk about one of the potential applications, and I want to try to show how you will go into designing a smart contract using math covenants. Because one of the criticisms that is often made about covenant proposals that are generic covenant proposals is that they are complicated to program with. And my impression is that this only happened because many of the other general covenant proposals are covenant by accidents, like opcat or things like that. But something that is designed to be with atomic operations that can do the simple things doesn't necessarily have to have that problem. So what is a vault? So in today's world, we have a UTXO. We can decide spending conditions. And then if we satisfy the spending condition, we send this UTXO to some destination. And that's how Bitcoin works, right? And so what would be cool is to have some way of protecting coins in a bit more stronger way. And so the idea is that you have some UTXO, which is inside a vault. And if you want to spend it, you decide where you want to send it. And you do a first transaction, which is an unvaulting transaction. And now you send these coins to another UTXO, which is a special UTXO, where you really commit to the destination. But the money is still there. It's not gone to the destination. And now the idea is that in the happy world, you want actually to do this transaction. And so you have a time lock, maybe a week. And after a week, the money can actually be spent and can go to the final destination. But what happens if someone stole your keys and managed to spend the coins in not authorized way? Well, the unvaulting UTXO also has an alternative spending path, which is not time locked, and which allows you to send the coins to a safe recovery address, which is protected by different keys. So this would be very cool for more secure cold storage, potentially. Because unlike the current model, where the only thing you can do is to add proactive security, where you have to make it more difficult to spend the coins, maybe split the keys in different places and so on. This adds reactive security because you see that a transaction is happening, you monitor the blockchain with a full node, and then you say like, oh, I don't want to send this transaction, so you can react to what's happening on the blockchain. And actually, this was the first idea of application done with covenants. And so recently there was a proposal from James O'Byrne of code called opvault, which is basically just a covenant with a single specific use case. And he listed some of the nice properties that you would want a vault proposal to have. And in the remaining time, I would like to show how you would try to design something similar to that, not exactly the same design, like this, just thinking about making a vault with math covenant. So this is the kind of design that we want to have. And so we start with the vault, the first UTXO. How would that spending condition look like? Well, you want to be able to check that let's say the first output is that specific script, which we call unvaulting. And we get some committing to the destination, which is passed through the witness. And we want that to be part of the data of the unvaulting UTXO. So this is all you need to do for the first. You check that the current input is the first, and you check that the output amount, like you're not losing money, so you're preserving the amount. And in this version, this will be for a single UTXO, but it's not hard to generalize this to allow multiple vault UTXO that are spent to the same unvaulting UTXO, right? Now you are in the UTXO, which is already the one where you are already out of the vault. You are unvaulting. And now you have this data which is embedded, which is something that represents the final destination. And so we want to implement the first spending path, which is the time lock path. How will that script look like? And that will be in a taproot spending condition. Well, you want to check the time lock that we can do today. You want to check, again, the current input is the first. You want to check that the money is actually going to the destination that was committed into the data. And we will do that with check input covenant verify, and using check output covenant verify as well. And you check that the output is what was described by the destination. So I didn't try to put specific scripts because the proposal is not formalized yet, but all these things are few opcodes in principle. That's the interesting thing. And so the other spending path will be the recovery spending path. So this is not time locked, can be done anytime. And so you just want to check the usual thing, like that the output script matches what is the expected recovery path, that there is no money loss, and that's about it. So I also had a slide with how we could think about doing L2. I don't know if I have time, but maybe I'll skip that and we can come at this later. But the conclusion is that we probably still want to have something like any prevout or check zip from stack if you want to do off-chain replacement of state. So this proposal could potentially combine with other things if you do want general smart contracts. And so what's nice with math contracts? Well, the opcodes are generic and relatively simple, so they're very easy to audit, and they are not specific to just one use case. So if you want a vault with a different design, you can do it. If you want to add more spending conditions, more spending paths, it's easy to do. The impact on nodes is easy to be convinced that it's very small, and you have a natural separation between the program and the data when you design the smart contracts. And I think it's easier to program and reason about compared to many other general contracts. The simplicity talk will disagree, of course. And so, yeah, there is a lot to do, which is we still have more research on mining incentives. We have to figure out if this is compatible with fee management and define exact opcodes. And so if you are interested, please do reach out and do get involved, because it would be nice to have more hands and more minds thinking on this. And that's all I have. If you have any questions, do you have time for questions?
I'll run around with this. Does anyone have any questions? I'll run with the mic towards you. It's on.
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. It was super interesting. I was wondering if you could briefly touch on the miner incentive question, like why might this be problematic for miner incentives?
So some of the concerns are the same that are often done with other proposals like drive chains. Like we could be concerned about two things. One is that by adding smart contracts, you could create conditions where miners are incentivized to look at what's happening inside the transactions, because they might discover that they can increase their income by altering how things happen on the blockchain, right? So this is the problem of MEV, like miner extractable value or whatever. And so that could, one problem of that is that it could lead to more miner centralization, because it becomes more difficult to be competitive if you are running a mining operation. And other problem could be that that could be used. You could try to create. There is some great research from Gleb Noumenko on how you could try to use smart contracts to bribe miners to, for example, censor a transaction, right? And so we do have to think about these things. I think it's a complex discussion that I don't want to try to get into answer in just little time that will deserve full talks on its own. My impression is that it's great to research these things, but I do think that any perverse incentives are possible anyway, even if you don't have smart contracts in Bitcoin. Meaning, if you, all that matters for miners is economics. So a smart contract running on Ethereum, if they can use it to make more income, it works for them. So the fact that you cannot do it on Bitcoin, I don't think it alters the economic incentive. So this is briefly the main argument why I don't think we should be scared. And on the other hand, if we do have more applications that allow us to do natively some smart contracts in Bitcoin, it means we have a greater income coming from fees, which makes that extra income potentially less attractive for them in the long run. So it could be both ways. It could be that we can actually improve the incentives by adding more smart contracts. Like we need to research that.
Great. Can we have another? Sorry, maybe we'll do a question in the break. I think we're going to go to the next talk now. Another round of applause, please, for Salvatore. That was fantastic. Is it fair to call you a Merkle tree maximalist? Is that an expression we're coining today?
Yes, I think that's a good definition.
Fantastic. Okay, great. We're going to get ready for the next talk now.